article that I've chosen to report on this week is The Pros and Cons of Globalization by Mike Collins. It appeared in Forbes magazine in 2015. Collins has a really interesting take on globalization. I get from the tone of the piece that he's not exactly for it. But he does make a point right out of the top by saying that globalization has been good for many developing countries who now have access to our markets and can export cheap goods. Interesting turn of phrase. Globalization's always been has also been good for multinational corporations and for Wall Street, but has not been so good for the blue collar workers whose jobs are being exported to other countries. The article was written in 2015, before 2016, when Ford and Carrier brought business back to the States from Mexico. Translux, who is the maker of LED stadium displays, came back from China. And in 2017, Sprint Cellular came back from Japan. General Motors and IBM brought business back from lots of countries around the world. Those statistics are from an article from Thornton O'Connell in 2017, March of this year. And I'll leave a link down at the bottom for that article. Collins goes on to list the commonly quoted pros and cons as relates to the argument of globalization. Under pros, he lists that free trade reduces barriers such as tariffs, value-added taxes, subsidies, and other barriers between nations. But he argues that this is not true. There are still many barriers to free trade. The research I've done tends to support that. Number two, competition between countries drives prices down. He again contends that this is not working because countries can manipulate their currency to get a price advantage. Number three, poor countries have the opportunity to spread prosperity, creating conditions in which democracy and respect for human rights may flourish. Collins contests that it's an ethereal goal which hasn't been achieved in most countries. However, in countries like Haiti, Mexico, North Korea, South Korea, that hasn't supported his claim. Number four, there's now a worldwide market for companies and consumers to have access to products from different countries. Collins agrees with that assessment, although we kind of have had access to products from other countries for quite a while now, prior to globalization. Number five, there's more of an influx of information between countries, which do not otherwise have anything in common between them. He contests this is true. I tend to agree. Number six, there's a cultural intermingling, and each country is learning more about other cultures. He also agrees with this statement, as do I. Number seven, since we share financial interests, corporations and governments are trying to sort out economic problems for each other. Collins contests that although this is true, they're doing more talking than trying. I tend to disagree with him on this fact. Number eight, socially we become more open and tolerant towards each other, and people who live in other parts of the world are not considered aliens. He contests this is true in many cases. I have my doubts. I'm seeing how just in this country we're having difficulty tolerating each other within this country in the same culture. So it's kind of a bone of contention on that. Number nine, labor can move from one country to the other to market their skills. Collins argues, although this is true, it can cause problems with the existing labor and downward pressure on wages. This is not necessarily the case in countries like the United States, where companies are coming back into the country and creating more jobs. And finally, sharing technology with developing nations will help them progress. Collins contests that this is true for small countries, but stealing our technologies and IP have become a big problem with our larger competitors like China. That is true. There's also a lot of hackers in China and Russia, but they're not developing countries. They're developed countries. Under cons, Collins lists The general complaint about globalization is that it has made the rich richer and the poor poorer. I don't necessarily know that this is true. Statistically, it seems that the rich are staying rich. The poor might be doing a little bit better, but I can't say that they're necessarily becoming poorer due to globalization. Number two, globalization is supposed to be about free trade where all barriers are eliminated, but there are still many barriers. Yeah, that is true. The example he gives is 161 countries have value-added taxes on imports, which are as high as 21.6% in Europe. Number three, the biggest problem for developed countries is that jobs are lost and transferred to lower cost countries. We covered this in the globalization class here in the MBA program. And one of the things that was mentioned about that is that while blue collar jobs do tend to go away when jobs are exported, what we need to do as a country is to evolve our job force with better training and move people into different job sets. Number four, large multinational corporations have the ability to exploit tax havens in other countries to avoid paying taxes. That has been in the news lately, so that is true. Number five, multinational corporations are accused of social injustice, unfair working conditions, like slave labor wages, living and working conditions, as well as lack of concern for the environment, misalignment of natural resources, and ecological damage. Number six, multinational corporations, which were previously restricted to commercial activities, are increasingly influencing political decisions. I think that multinational companies have kind of always been influencing political decisions. So I can't say that globalization in its strictest definition is the cause of that. Number seven, building products overseas in countries like China puts our technologies at risk of being copied or stolen. Yeah, that's actually happening on a very, very large scale, particularly with China. Number eight, some experts think that globalization is also leading to the incursion of communicable diseases like HIV/AIDS that are being spread by travelers to the remotest corners of the globe. I think that this was happening anyway, just due to um, the travel technologies that we currently have. Number nine, globalization has led to the exploitation of labor. Prisoners and child workers are used in inhumane conditions. That's been proven. But I don't necessarily know that globalization is the cause for that. Those conditions existed beforehand. I think it's just elevated it to the next level. Number 10, social welfare schemes or safety nets are under great pressure in developed countries because of deficits, job losses, and other economic ramifications of globalization. That can be true. I don't necessarily know that that is restricted specifically to globalization. Look at the steel industry and how many people went out of business there. Collins then also asks the question. I'm going to run through this very quickly, otherwise this will be a very, very long video, which it probably already is. He asks what is missing, and he lists four things. They are leadership, balanced trade, trade agreements, and enforcement of the rules. Collins closes out by basically saying that what's good for third world countries like Kenya is not necessarily good for developed countries like America. That specifically, again, mentions the loss of blue-collar jobs. Um, so what have I learned? Well, globalization's complicated. That's what I learned. Uh, Different cultures, different societal mores, different laws, different beliefs. That's hard to corral into one big globalized business. Um, it's difficult for us to accept differences in other cultures. Civil rights activist Andre Lorde put it best when she said, "It's not our differences that divide us. It's our inability to recognize, accept, and celebrate those differences."